So let's dive in, because now I just ate 4 minutes of my time. So we want to talk about ought not. We are the series that we're in. You know, we are going from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And diving right in, we have a recap of where we have been. So hopefully that's a recap for you guys. I know like last week we mostly focused on Moses talking to the burning bush, so we didn't get a whole lot of chance to talk about Pharaoh, let my people go, the parting of the Red Sea, the 10 plagues, all of that sort of stuff. But hopefully you guys know that story. If not, like, actually I would really encourage, it sounds like not many of you had seen the movie The Prince of Egypt. Give that one a watch. I think it's good. It's not, you know, a fully, completely biblically accurate depiction, but that's not really their goal per se. But it does give you a good sense of what was kind of going on. One of my favorites, if you want to watch a classic movie, I showed those clips right there from the Charlton Heston, like 1940s 10 Commandments. That's pretty good. It's long. It's like 3.5 hours long, but it does tell the whole story all the way from Moses' birth all the way through his death. Really, it's his entire life that is in that movie, so it's one of my favorites. But anyway, where we want to pick up today is after all of that, right? So you know about the parting of the Red Sea, let my people go, etc., etc. They go through, the water comes crashing back down, all of Pharaoh's people get washed away, etc., etc. Which, by the way, I don't have time to talk about it. Maybe we'll talk about this on Wednesday. There's some really interesting archaeological research that has been done trying to figure out where that took place. Lots, like, do some Google search on that, because it's really fascinating, all the stuff that they've uncovered, or attempted to uncover at the least. So after that, you guys know they travel through the wilderness to get to Mount Sinai, because as we talked about last week, God said, you will come back to worship me on this mountain. So the same place where Moses saw the burning bush is where they go back to go worship God as the whole, the entire nation of Israel, which they think there was maybe 2 to 3 million people that were there. So huge, an entire nation of people go up to this mountain. They get there, the entire mountain is engulfed in flames. So Moses is like, all right, come on, let's go worship God. And everyone's like, whoa, like, no, we're not into that. I'll tell you what, you go up there, and if you survive, maybe we'll jump in too. So Moses goes up there, God gives him the 10 Commandments, he comes back down. It's been a long time, so people, you know, they built like the golden calf to worship in place of God, which literally breaks like 4 or 5 of the 10 Commandments. So God gets really angry. Moses is like, hey, hang on, give us a second chance. So God does give them the law, which I don't know if you guys know this about the law, and we don't have a long time to talk about the law, but so the law is not just the 10 Commandments. Hopefully you guys know about the 10 Commandments. We talked about it a couple of months ago. And we even watched that video that you can find on YouTube again that helps you memorize the 10 Commandments. Beyond the 10 Commandments, though, there are 650 more commands that God gives in what we call the law. And you find that in the book of Leviticus and in the book of Exodus. And all of those commands were really designed to kind of give the nation of Israel a new understanding of what it was to live life. Because if you think about it, for 400 years, these people had been slaves in Egypt. So, like, it's not just, I've always been a slave. and not even that my parents have always been slaves, but we're talking about like 10 generations at least had been slaves. Like all they knew was slavery. And if you think about slavery, I mean, slavery is literally, I mean, the Egyptians would tell them when to eat, what to eat, when to work, when to sleep, if they could have children. If they decided, hey, we're going to kill all your children, that was their choice. You had no like free will whatsoever. So now all of a sudden that they have free will, it's kind of this like, well, what do we do? How do we behave as a people? And that's where God gives them the law. And it's literally, if you read through the law, there's a lot of really specific, like, literally this is a verse where it's, let's say that your ox falls into a hole that someone else dug. Whose responsibility is that? Well, you need to, and then like literally outlining what you should do if that happens. But the fascinating thing is, when Jesus shows up thousands of years later, Jesus says like, okay, you got the law, that's good. That was like step one. That was understanding your actions and like the literal baseline, don't do and do these things. But what God's really after is your heart. The actions are supposed to reflect what's going on inside, not be the whole thing. And I think that's a real challenge. I mean, especially for us today, where my guess is a lot of us following Jesus, being a Christian, is about doing stuff. And usually when we feel guilty, I think it's about stuff. It's about, did I read my Bible enough? Did I go to church enough? I don't feel like I did, like, oh, I feel like I'm unworthy or whatever. It's all about stuff that we do, and Jesus comes along and says like, no, it's about your heart. I mean, the classic example is he said like, so you talked about not murdering, and that's good, but honestly, that is such a low bar. I just haven't murdered anybody. The goal is you're not supposed to hate. The goal's inside here. And the people were kind of like, to Jesus, like, whoa, like, leave my heart alone. My heart is my business. Like, you can deal, I'm okay doing stuff for you or following rules for God, but my heart is me. Like, you leave me alone. And Jesus is saying, like, no, that's the whole point of what we're doing here. It's all about transforming our heart. So along those lines is that the biggest thing that I think comes out then of this section is this idea of the tabernacle. So again, we don't have a whole lot of time to explain what the tabernacle is, but we'll start with this idea. Actually, hold on. The first one that I want to show you guys is Exodus chapter, what is this, 20, I can't even see my own notes. 25, there it is, Exodus 25. This is in the law. It says, then have them, the Israelites, make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. So now the word tabernacle, right there, literally means tent of meeting. So what this place was, is it was a tent that God said, I will dwell among you. Like literally, I will be there in this tent. So everywhere that they went, like when the entire nation would travel, every time they stopped, they would build this tent. And in this tent, God said, I will be in there. Now, think about that. Like, that might not sound like much to us today, because I think we know, like, oh, but God's everywhere, and we know that, and he's inside your heart, and yada, yada, yada. But they didn't know that back then. That was not the way that they thought about gods. The gods that existed back then, or that people thought about back then, were very regional and very specific. I mean, again, 400 years of slavery, all they knew, they were very familiar with the Egyptian gods. And the Egyptian gods was, you have the god of the Nile, you have the god of the sun, you have the god of, like, very specific gods. So the idea that God's everywhere was a little too much, so instead say, like, okay, but I will literally be here. And for me, it's kind of this thing, imagine that. Imagine that there was a place at our church, at Baseline, where you could literally know God was right there. If I go in there, I can talk to God, because God's presence is right over there. Now, the crazy thing is that people weren't allowed to go in there because they were afraid they were going to die being in the presence of God, and they probably would have. Like, that's one thing that, like, when Moses wants to see him, he says, you can't. Like, even if you came that close to me, your unworthiness would kill you. Like, you wouldn't be able to survive my pureness. My holiness would destroy you. So what they, like, in the tabernacle, what they did was, one day a year, the Day of Atonement, the priest, the high priest, would go into the Holy of Holies where God's presence dwelled. One time a year, they were allowed to go in there. Moses was kind of a different story because he had a personal relationship with God. But after that, one person, one day a year, was allowed to go into God's presence. So, and not only that, they had a rope around his leg because they were so sure he was going to die. That rope was supposed to be able to pull him back out again if he died, because he couldn't be in God's presence. So, what does that do for us? Well, I wanted to show you guys two other passages which I think are really interesting that follows right after this. So the next one is this one. God's talking about his presence with the Israelites. And whoa, hey, why did you stop? Nope, go back. Come on, restart. There you go. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place. Oh, too fast. I wasn't fast enough. Let's try it again. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place. You and the people you brought. I still can't go this fast. Oh my goodness. I timed all this out and now it's going way faster than I expected. All right, hang on. Slow down. Okay, refresh. There you go. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on the ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I go with you even a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. So there's this interesting idea that because of the golden calf, because of all the ways that the Israelites had already strayed from God, God said, like, I can't go with you. So you need to go by yourselves. But I'll send an angel with you, you will be protected, all of this sort of thing. So it's this really interesting idea of you get all the good stuff, so to speak. You get God's protection, God's blessing, God's favored status, everything, but you just don't get God himself. You get everything but his presence. And this is really interesting because then here, hopefully this one will go slower, is Moses' response. Come on, bro, why do you keep doing this to me? Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, still too fast. All right, hang on. I do practice this, believe it or not, but slow me down. Thank you. Refresh. Okay, one more time. Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I will know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. So again, it's this really interesting idea that what God is offering is he said, listen, I'll send you all your blessings, I'll send you the protection, I'll send this angel with you, you get everything, but I can't go with you. You guys are a stiff-necked people, or it's just not going to work for me to go. And Moses says, no, we're not going. If you don't go with us, why would we be any different than anyone else out there? We don't just want your stuff. We don't just want your blessings. We actually want your presence. We actually want you. And I think that's a really interesting question for us as we're thinking about this idea of tabernacle. We're thinking this idea of God's presence with us. Is this idea that if we could choose between God's presence and God's stuff, God's blessing, God's mercy, God's everything that God does for us, if we could choose between that and this, My guess is the reality is for a lot of us, we take the stuff. Is that especially in our culture today, where we are so fixated on like what can we get and like earning things for myself, the best life I can live, like all of those sort of things, to get God's blessing and God's, you know, stuff, even without the relationship with Him, like, oh, that's fine. Like, is the relationship with God really that important? Another way of thinking about it is that, like, I heard somebody say one time, if all God had ever done for us was die on the cross, it would be more than we could ever deserve. What if He didn't? What if He didn't die on the cross for us? Would He be worth our time? Would He be worth having a relationship with? And that's what's so interesting about this question of tabernacle, I think, is that I think, is really what it means to be a Christian. It doesn't mean doing stuff. It doesn't mean even believing things. It means that God literally goes with us. God is literally inside us, traveling everywhere with us. And so for me, like, I try and picture that, like, imagine that I could actually physically see God's presence everywhere that I went. Like, what would change? Imagine that, because I know mentally, in my brain, intellectually, I know God's right here with me. I know God's inside of me. What if I could see Him? What if I could see Him standing right here? And everywhere, almost like my shadow, everywhere that I went, God was going to go with me. Like, what would change? Because imagine, He would go everywhere, right? So if I walked over there and had lunch, He would go with me. If I went over there and sat and watched TV, if I played a video game, if I hopped in the car, if I went whatever, if I took a shower, He's going to be right there with me. Now, initially, don't get me wrong, that would be a little weird, right? There's somebody here who's with me in these times when I thought I was by myself. You know, I mean, when I'm going to the bathroom, again, when I'm in the shower, when I'm sleeping, He's like right there. But after a time, I wonder if even that, would we just not even pay attention? I mean, like, think about our shadow. Do we really think about our shadow very often at all? I mean, we don't think about it as an entity, because it's not. It's just a, you know, the sun or the light creating a, not even a reflection, a shadow. But like, what if we were that aware of God's presence? What would change? I have a hunch, again, long term, not much. I feel like we would forget about that relatively quickly. So how do we cherish, remember, hold on to God's presence? How does that become something that is real, that God is actually with us? And for me, I think one thing is kind of, I guess, remembering it, or at least associating Christian activity with that. With this idea that when I open the Bible, God's right there with me. While I'm watching this right now, God's right there with me. I mean, because I think if we start there, if we start with thinking about these Christian activities, God is literally right here watching me, with me, not just watching, but involved, then hopefully we can take that and then apply it to, well, there's other parts, like when I'm doing my homework, He is right there watching me. When I'm playing a sport, He's right there watching me. When I'm doing something that I feel like I shouldn't be doing, He's right there watching me. And I don't think He's angry. I don't think He's judging. I don't think He's saying like, oh, come on, bro. Like, you're doing this again. Like, no. But, I mean, it might change my perspective. Like, would I behave differently if I remembered the fact that God was right there? If I'm tempted by sin, am I going to do that right in front of God? Because the reality is we already are. But it's just how we actually think about God's presence with us. And again, I think that's what it means to be a Christian. That we are aware and we embrace the fact that God is right there with us at all times. All right, so much more. I want to dive into this. Again, we'll hop on Zoom right now if you guys want to join us. We'll also be there on Wednesday. And then we'll also get some time to chat at our summer nights. So I really want to encourage those of you that feel comfortable to join us for one of those too. So in the meantime, let me pray for us, and then yeah, we can hop on Zoom together. All right. Father, thank you for your presence. Man, it is something that is peculiar even right now as I'm praying. I don't feel like I'm talking to somebody who is right there beside me. Like somehow there's something a little bit more distant about a prayer, that it's like sending it off into the ether or something like that, as opposed to thinking about I'm literally talking to someone who is right beside me or right inside me, I guess is another way of putting it. It's kind of a hard concept to wrap my mind around, to be honest with you. So for this week, I just want to pray for all of us that help us kind of resonate with what that means, what that looks like, what that feels like to actually have you beside us, and that what an amazing blessing it is that your presence is here, and that we wouldn't trade that for anything. That's what it means for us to be on board with your Son. Thank you. We love you. And in your Son's name, we do pray.